So you might have seen this news around recently where Minister Chee Hong Tat mentioned that if the HDB prices continue to moderate, the government may consider removing the 15-month wait-out period. So if you are planning to buy a HDB in 2025 or 2026, or if you are currently a HDB owner, in this video, I'll break down the possible scenarios that can happen and provide you with some possible solutions so that you can better position yourself as a HDB owner and you can navigate yourself for what's to come for the rest of 2025. So I'll break this down into 3 segments. Point number 1, what is this 15-month wait-out period about? Who does it affect and how? Point number 2, with the increase of BTO supply, who does it affect and how? And last point number 3, how do HDB owners and buyers navigate around this? Just to be clear, everything I share here is based on my own personal opinions and experiences. I'm not speaking on behalf of any government agency, so always do your due diligence for your own property. So if you're under the age of 55 and you sell your private property, you will have to wait for a 15-month wait-out period before you can buy a HDB resale flat. However, if you are 55 and older, this will not apply to you if you buy a 4-room or smaller. But if you want to buy a 5-room, EA or EM, you will still need to abide to this 15-month wait-out period. This rule was introduced to cool the demand for resale flats, particularly the 5-room HDB, executive mansionettes, and executive apartments. It is pretty common for us as agents to meet older couples where they choose to cash out from their landed property or their condominiums and they use their cash proceeds to fully pay for their next HDB. So because of this demand for larger flats, it actually caused prices to actually increase significantly. So it is natural for the government to decide to step in and control HDB prices because they will still want to ensure that public housing is kept affordable and accessible not just for now but also our future generation. Now we also want to understand why the bigger HDB flats have seen a huge increase in demand and in turn increase in pricing. So we look at this chart which actually shows the number of BTO flats launched by year, and it shows that the number of 5-room flats are actually much lesser than the 4-room HDB flats, which then resulted in the prices of the 5-room flats to increase. So HDB also made a press release on how they want to make sure that prices are moderate by rolling out more than 50,000 BTO flats from 2025 to 2027. And also not forgetting that the number of MOP units will increase from 8,000 to 13,000 in 2026 and 19,500 in 2028. Which leads to my point number 2. How does this increase in supply going to affect you? So here is something that I often explain to my clients using a simple illustration. So basically there are 2 main property classes in Singapore, which is the HDB and the private market. So in the private market, usually there are mostly condominiums. There are 2 subcategories, which is the resale condominium and also the brand new condominium. So why is it that the resale condominiums tend to have this increment over the years? Usually in the private market, there's a price gap between the resale condo and the new launches. So let's say a new launch today is going for 2,000 PSF. And the resale in the same area is going for 1,500 PSF. So let's just take an example of a 1,000 square feet unit. And that would cost 2 million for the new launch and 1.5 million for the resale. And because of this gap, right, buyers who cannot afford a new launch condominium at 2 million but would still like to go for a condominium, the natural choice would be to go for the resale, which will then allow more people to afford the resale condominium. And with this price gap of 500,000, it will then allow and support the price growth of this resale condominium to increase. However, HDBs behave in a completely different manner as private properties. So say an average BTO today in Bukit Batok costs about 400,000. Once they hit its MOP, they would naturally want to compare the prices based on the nearby clusters of resale flats and benchmark their price to that level. So today, if let's say you look at Property Guru, an average 5-room HDB in Bukit Batok will cost about 900,000. So the newly MOP BTO clusters would also want to sell the HDB at the 900,000 benchmark price. So here is the issue. Every year, there are new HDBs reaching their MOP since there are going to be newer flats that come into the resale market. And generally for HDBs, the layouts are quite similar. So if a buyer were to come into this Bukit Batok cluster to purchase a HDB flat, and location-wise, they're all in Bukit Batok, they are almost the same. And this one is like MOP in 2022, 2023, 2024. And they're all commanding the same price with just a 1-year MOP difference. Which one will the buyer want to see first? Would it be the newer block or the older block? Buyers actually would naturally go for the newer block because generally the layout is the same and so is the location. So the concern here is that what will happen to these HDBs that are getting older and older every year, given that every single year, right, there will be more than 1,000 units coming up going to compete with your pricing. So even if your unit is only a year or two older, it starts to become harder to justify the same price with the newer flats, and that's where the downward pressure kicks in. So many people that I have met felt that HDB prices would keep increasing. So say if I buy a $1 million HDB, it would go up to 1.5 million or even 2 million. However, I believe that the government still aims to allow property prices to increase, but at a more sustainable rate. So let's also not forget that there was a particular time of 7 to 8 years where the HDB prices did not increase, but in fact it also took a dip. And these case studies are to show you where there are scenarios that HDB owners have actually went through this cycle. This actually happened in 2013 all the way to 2015, and I'm taking this particular block in Punggol Central, and what happened was that during the peak, right, prices increased all the way from 515,000 in 2010 to 2012, which was the last peak where it hit 592,000. However, because the HDB prices increased by so much, the government actually introduced a series of cooling measures to cool off the HDB prices in 2013, and because of that, there were not much transactions in the year of 2013, resulting in not much demand, particularly in the older blocks. So what happened here is that the prices actually dropped from 592,000 to 440,000, and in fact the lowest was 425,000 in 2015. In a short span of 2 to 3 years, that is a drop of 120,000, which is why when the government announced that there will be an increase in number of supply of HDB flats, that is a key indicator that prices are expected to moderate soon. So let's look at another area, Bukit Batok. So in 2013, the highest peak was 765,000, and in 2014, there were no transactions. And all the way to 2017, the price went down to 665,000 in the span of 4 years. So the price of the HDB has actually dropped 100,000. Now, I actually believe that it's not because these HDB owners choose to sell it at a lower price, and it's more because there was nobody buying, and when they really needed to move on from this house, they have to drop their pricing lah. So again, it's not really about speculating whether HDB prices will drop or not. At this point, I think what is most important here is how do we protect the capital and the profits that we have, because the last thing that we want to experience is being caught unaware that this is going to impact us in the years to come. So just now we actually discussed on how the potential effects that we are facing with the 15-month wait-out period and also the increase in supply of BTOs and how it impacts us as HDB owners or HDB buyers today. So next, the more important thing here is how do we solve this? If you are intending to sell, and what are your next plans? And when you are considering to buy, where would it be a better place for you to plan your housing next? So first thing, check your upcoming BTO supply in your area. So if you are in an estate like Bukit Batok where new flats are launching every single year, it's worth to be more cautious, and my recommendation is definitely to plan ahead. So as comparing to areas like Kovan, right, when there are no recent BTO supply and the only one is right next to the MRT, and most flats in Kovan are around 20 to 30 years old, So in estates like this, right, there will be more certainty that the prices will be able to hold up better because there is simply less competition. Now, I know not everybody wants to move. Maybe your kids go to school nearby or your family is there. And if in that case, how do you then further protect your profits? You can consider upgrading within your estate, and that is to shift closer to the MRT. We can definitely plan ahead based on this new HDB classification that the government is going to further classify into 3 main categories, and that is the standard, plus and prime flats. The standard flats are usually in the more heartland areas that are further out. These HDB flats will come with major subsidies from the government, and the next tier is the plus flats, where they are closer to transport hubs like MRT and even town centres where there are better connectivity and amenities. So the last category is the prime flats, where they are located in the city centre. So if you would like to go for this kind of plus or prime flats, they will come with a longer MOP period of 10 years, and you are also not allowed to actually rent out the whole flat. And also, if you're looking to sell your plus or prime HDB flats to your next buyer, they will also need to fulfill income ceiling of 14,000, and their MOP period will also be 10 years. So if somebody wants to live near the MRT or live at a better location but does not want the restrictions, what will be their alternative? Naturally, they will want to go for the resale that do not have such restrictions. That is why my next advice is for those who own a HDB and they are not staying near to the MRT and there is a lot of supply in the surrounding, try to shift close to the MRT, because in the future, even if new flats come out, they will be referred to as the plus HDB, which will be restricted under the 10-year MOP and income ceiling. So those group of buyers who do not wish to be restricted will be naturally finding those alternatives that are near to MRT. So if you hold on to a resale HDB that is near to the MRT, what are the chances of you being able to protect your price better? Is it higher? So your prices would simply be more stable because of the fact that the demand for MRT would never change. So here's an example of a client who actually owned a newly MOP 4-room HDB flat at Yishun Avenue 4, and as you can see, it's actually quite far from the MRT, and the average sale price was around 600,000. So the advice that was given was to swap to somewhere closer to the MRT, and even better if it's a 5-room flat. Because 5-room flats tend to be more in demand, you can swap from 600 to 650,000, which will mean that there will be a top-up of 50,000. So by doing a brief calculation, assuming the average BTO price is 280,000, which should be the rough prices in the Yishun area where they bought 9 years back. So if we use a HDB loan of 224,000 at 2.6% loan with loan duration of 25 years, your monthly installment will work out to be about $1,016. So at the point, the average selling price of a 4-room flat was about 610,000, and after we less off the outstanding loan of 180,000, the cash proceeds plus CPF will work out to be about 430,000. So based on these figures, you are able to plan ahead for the next housing, and based on this purchase price of this 5-room HDB that is nearer to the MRT of 650,000 plus buyer stamp duty of 14,100, and then you use all your cash proceeds of 430,000, you are left with 234,000 in terms of HDB loan. And in terms of monthly installment, right, it's actually pretty similar to what you have taken previously with just a small top-up of $46. So this is the scenario where you actually use all your proceeds for the upgrade. However, if we want to move on to another scenario where you actually keep at least 100,000 as your reserve funds, using the exact same scenario where we have proceeds of 430,000 from selling the 4-room flat and similarly purchasing a 5-room flat at 650,000 and same amount of stamp duty of $14,100, but this time I use 100,000 less of my sales proceeds, and that will mean my loan will be higher at $334,000. and the monthly installment would have increased to $1,515 per month. And with these 100,000 reserve funds, you can actually service the full monthly installment for 66 months. So in this sense, you are able to buy a larger house in a better location, and you still have surplus, and you do not have to worry about the monthly installment for a good few years. So of course, this case study is based on simple scenarios, and usually there are a lot more calculations that need to be done, especially in terms of timeline and what you can buy. So let's say if you were to sell based on your location and you are not sure of how to plan for this, you can reach out to me via my contact methods below. So here's a quick recap on the above. So check if your estate has high upcoming BTO supply. And number 2, if you have a smaller unit, think about upgrading to a bigger flat because they are more limited in numbers, which will also mean more protection in your HDB prices. And lastly, consider a swap in location. Consider an upgrade to a prime or central location, or if you are not near an MRT and there are many flats coming up around you, it might be time to move to a better place to protect your HDB prices. So if you have found this useful, you can hit the like button, drop your questions in the comments, and subscribe so that you don't miss the next video. And here is my Telegram channel where you can get all the market updates, and there is also my number that you can drop me a WhatsApp. And I'll see you in the next one.